Today, we're going to be creating this animation, and we're going to be creating some vines, we're going to be creating some leaves, the vase, and then we're going to put it all together and use a bunch of shape layer design techniques to build out this entire thing. Let's get into it. Alright, we're starting off with the pen tool and just drawing the general shape of the leaf. And I'm just clicking on these points. I'm not using any fancy Bezier curves for them. I'm just doing the very rough shape with hard edges, and we'll go ahead and fix that using an effect or a modifier, I think it's called on a shape layer. So we'll find the round corners. And this is the beauty of illustrating stuff like this. You don't have to be super good at drawing. You don't have to tweak all those curves until the end of time. You can just click around, and then we'll use round corners to just smooth out those curves. And where we want it to be a little bit sharper, you'll see I put down more points closer together. And now we'll go ahead and still on the same shape layer, draw a new shape. And this is going to be our edge mask. So I'm just making that red so we can clearly see what it is. And this will be the one cutting into the left side of the leaf. And we'll go ahead and do the same for the right side. So I have two separate shapes that I'm putting into a group called edge. And again, we'll use round corners. So we'll smooth off those corners a little bit to make it look nicer. And you'll see in here, I actually did accidentally draw that one using the Bezier curves. So I'm just converting that to a regular one, and now it's as smooth as the rest. Then I'll use a wiggle path modifier. I don't want it to be animated, but I'm using this to just be able to change up the way that it looks and add a little bit more organic detail to the shape. All right, new shape still on the same layer. I'm just drawing a little circular sort of shape. I'm putting this into a group I'm calling whole mid. And I'm making it blue just to be able to differentiate it from the others. I'm going to do the same process of using round corners in that group to just smooth out this shape a little bit, because I want it to be more organic. I don't just want to do an ellipse in there. I want to be able to draw it myself and then round off the corners. And now we're going to be using a repeater in this group. So I'm only affecting the whole mid group, and I'm using a repeater to repeat this shape just on the y-axis. So it's repeating a few times upwards. And now still in the whole mid group, I'm going to add a wiggle transform to this to be able to have a more organic placement of where these blue shapes are placed, because I don't want them to just be repeating in a vertical line. I do want them to have a bit of random positions around this middle of the leaf. And of course, you could draw all of these holes manually, place them exactly where you want them to be, but I'm using this tutorial and this project as an opportunity to just play around with the shape modifiers and use those as my design tools instead of drawing a shape manually the way that I want it to be. This is also a big benefit of making easy variations of that shape. So if we want to duplicate it but have slight variations of it, this is a very good way of working. And now I'm creating a new group, and I'm placing all of the whole elements into that one to be able to use the merge path correctly. So I have my original leaf, then I have a group containing all of my whole elements, which are also placed in groups. And then I'm using a merge path to just take the original leaf shape, but subtract all the other shapes. And I'm doing this because I want to be able to have a fill for the layer, but also a stroke. If I didn't need to have the stroke, I could just do a lot of this using masking, but because I want to be able to have that control, or at least want to be able to have the option of having that black stroke turned on, I do need to build things out in this way to make the shape layers work the way that they should. So now we're jumping into creating the vine and the overall shape of this leaf element on the branch. So I'm just creating a new composition, importing my leaf that we just did, scaling it down, and then creating a path, just drawing it by hand again, and I'm using it as a bit of a reference for where I want to place my leaves. So it's just black for now, but we'll go ahead and change it to a more greenish color, and we'll also use a little bit of tapering so it gets thinner at the top but stays thicker at the bottom. And now I'll go ahead and create a new shape layer. And this one is just going to be 3 black shapes that I'm then using to preserve underlying transparency on, and just fading it down to give a little bit of a shadow falling from the leaves down to the branch itself. I'm going to create a slider control with a time and an amp slider, and this is my usual process for creating any kind of wiggle expression. So I want to be able to wiggle the leaves so that they're slightly moving throughout the animation, but I don't want to hard code the animation for them. I want to be able to control them with a slider. This is a very good way of working that allows you for continuous flexibility throughout the creation process. So we'll dive back into the leaf, and this is pretty much my typical workflow. I'll create the base element, the leaf, in a composition. I'll then place that leaf in the context of where it's going to end up being used. In this case, placed along that vine. And then I can jump back into the comp and make some adjustments to the design, continuously update it throughout the entire process. And this gives me a lot of flexibility by having everything created in After Effects using shape layers, modifiers, effects, layer styles. Right now I'm using an inner shadow to just place a little bit of that speckled texture on it. And now I'm duplicating the leaf. I'm making it blue just so I can see what it looks like. I'm using an offset path to just shrink it down a little bit to sort of have the inner shape, and I'm removing the holes on this layer so I just have the inner shape of the leaf, which I'm going to have as a little bit of a darker shade of green just placed in the middle here. And on this one, I also want to use a wiggle path to again create a more organic version of that shape that doesn't look fully digital and 100% perfect. And then we'll go ahead and create a darker green version of it, and I'll just call that leaf inside. Turn on the underlying transparency and way down with the opacity so it's more subtle. I'll then duplicate the original leaf and call it leaf outlines, and I'm of course going to remove the fill and just keep the outline so I have a black outline on top of everything else that I place below it. And now we'll go ahead and create some lines as inner detail for this leaf. So I'm creating a completely new shape layer, just drawing a single path, and then I'm going to be drawing lines going across from that middle out to the edges of the leaf. And I'm doing that on the left and the right side. Again, we're using our good old friend wiggle path to add more organic shape to the lines. I'm going to set it to overlay and turn down the opacity. And I just want to have this as a little bit of a subtle texture in the middle of the leaf. I'm going to use a tapering effect on the middle line so it goes from thick to thin. And then I'm going to duplicate this entire layer, make it much thinner, and change a few of the settings so it's kind of acting like an ambient occlusion inside of these ridges in the leaf. So we have one version that we did first, then we have an inside version that's much thinner that I'm also using roughen edges on, and this is kind of doing the shading in the small little crevices of this pattern. So we want to place the whole leaf and vine into something, and we're just going to do a vase or a vase. And I am starting off by just using the rounded rectangle, creating 2 circles more or less placed on top of each other, using the merge path to merge those together. And I just want to have the outline for this shape. And then I'll create a new shape at the top, use another merge path to just cut off that top circle to end up with this shape. And we'll build out our scene. So I'm creating a new 1920 by 1080 comp. I've just put in a background solid in here in whatever color that you like. Mine happened to be orange. Then I'm importing my vase layer here. And then I'm going to import my leaf vine. And I'm going to start to build out my scene of what I want it to look like. In this case, it is basically just the leaves, the vines, the pot, and I'm centering that on an orange background for a pretty clean, minimalistic, animated little thing. So continuously, I'm going in and out of the different compositions. I'm changing the layout, I'm changing the way that the animation works. And in this case, I wanted to move up the leaves quite a bit because I don't want them to cut into the vase itself. And I'm going to go ahead and use a CC Bend It effect, again, using the same wiggle technique, connecting the wiggle to 2 slider controls, one for the time, one for the amplitude, which allows me to continuously change the numbers for the number of times per second it rotates and how much it rotates without needing to dive into the expressions of each layer individually. I'm using several copies of the leaf vine and I'm connecting all of those to the same expression controls. I am standing right next to a window while I'm recording this, and it has just started to massively rain, so I hope that that sound in the background is not going to end up being too different. So we're diving back into the vase here. I'm creating a new solid with 3 masks, and then I'm just using a fast box blur and changing the blending mode to dissolve, again to create this speckly texture, but using a different technique than we did before, using a layer style. Here I'm doing it all using a new solid, a blur, and then the blending mode of dissolve to be able to create that effect. Then we want to put some water into our pot. So I'm using a new shape layer and I'm just placing that so it's only showing up in the plant pot, and I'm using that as a mat. And now I'm going to go ahead and add a wave warp to that water to give it the water type movement. Pretty easy effect to use for some sort of liquid movement like this, instead of trying to manually animate it frame by frame. Wave warp is going to be your friend. And then I'm going to be duplicating that water and making a darker version and then offsetting that and placing it in the background. So it's sort of looking like 2 different water elements rotating around each other. So they're circling inside of this water pot. So for the water, I'm now creating a mask with a big feather, and I'm just doing that to smooth out them fading away from the bottom, just to create a little bit of a fun effect. I'm also changing the overlay. I'm changing the blending mode to overlay, and I'm tweaking around with the colors to end up with something that looks a bit more fun and a bit more unique. Not super realistic, but doesn't really have to be for this animation. And I'm just going to go ahead and create a shadow for the bottom using a new solid layer that's going to be a darker, more saturated version of the background color. In this case, a vibrant orange reddish color with a heavy feather, and there we go. So diving into the vase again, I'm going to create a new shape layer that's going to be acting as a highlight. And this is just a big shape that I'm drawing by hand. I'm creating a matte version of the pot itself to make sure it's only showing up inside of it. And then I'm going to mask it and heavily feather it and create a little highlight shape on the left side as well to be acting the same way as the one on the right side. Again, just a stylized look for how to create a highlight in this case. All right, that is it for today. We did the entire thing from the leaf to the vine to the vase to putting it all together, and now it is up to you to go ahead and animate the whole thing so you can end up with something kind of like this thing. Just spent a few more minutes putting the animation together, and if you want to know more about the animation process, do stick around, like, subscribe. See you next time.